In the cradle between mountains and desert, where the sun bakes the earth into gold and fire, a people once rose who dreamed of order, not chaos. They called themselves Parsa. To the world, they would become Persians. From the rugged highlands of Iran to the waters of the Indus, from the Nile to the Aegean, their empire would stretch farther than any before it, a realm so vast that the Greeks, in awe and in fear, called it simply the Empire of the World. But this is not merely the story of conquest. It is the story of a vision, of a man who believed that an empire could be built not by the whip, but by wisdom. That faith and freedom could exist beneath the same crown, and that a ruler's greatness was not measured by fear, but by mercy. His name was Cyrus, Cyrus the Great. Long before the Caesars or the Khans, before Alexander's fury or Rome's dominion, Cyrus forged something the world had never seen: a united empire of nations, bound not by chains, but by law. He freed the enslaved, respected every god, every tongue, every custom. He declared that no people should be forced from their homes, words carved into clay nearly 2,500 years ago, still echoing through time as the world's first declaration of human rights. From that spark arose an idea that power could coexist with principle, that conquest could bring not destruction, but civilization. And for 2 centuries, Persia would hold the torch of that idea. From Cyrus to Darius, from Xerxes to Khosrow, it would become a civilization of roads and palaces, of art and tolerance, of fire and faith. An empire that stretched from the sands of Egypt to the snow of the Hindu Kush, ruled by kings who called themselves the kings of kings. Yet, even the brightest flame casts a shadow, and within the grandeur of Persepolis, the seeds of decline already took root. Corruption, pride, the weight of luxury. As the empire expanded beyond what any mind could govern, its spirit began to fracture. From the mountains came invaders with names history would remember: Macedon, Alexander. And in a single night of fire, Persepolis, the heart of Persia, was turned to ash. But Persia did not die. For empires are mortal, but ideas endure. Zoroastrian priests kept the sacred flame alive. Poets like Ferdowsi sang of heroes and kings long after their palaces had crumbled, and the Persian spirit of order, of beauty, of endurance would rise again and again through Parthia, through the Sassanids, through the soul of every empire that came after. The body of an empire may fall, but the soul of Persia never does. This is the story of the first true empire of humanity, of vision and hubris, of fire and faith. This is the story of Persia, the flame that burned across continents, and the shadow that time could never extinguish. Before Persia became an empire, it was only a name whispered by wind, a land of silence and stone, a sea of mountains, deserts, and salt plains, a place that tested men and forged gods. To the west lay Mesopotamia, cradle of empires, Assyria, Babylon, ancient powers that ruled by fear and fire. To the east stretched the untamed lands of the Indus. Between them, like a scar upon the earth, rose the Iranian plateau, harsh, vast, unyielding. It was here that 2 peoples would learn the language of endurance: the Medes, lords of the north, and the Persians, wanderers of the south. The Persians called their homeland Parsa, the land beyond the mountains. No rivers rich enough to feed cities, no fields wide enough to feed armies. Only faith, fire, and the will to survive. They worshipped Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, the light that fights the darkness, and perhaps it was that eternal struggle between light and dark, between chaos and order, that would one day define their empire. For centuries, these tribes lived beneath the shadow of the Medes, vassals in name, but never in spirit. The Medes had carved their dominion from the ruins of Assyria. They were proud, noble, yet fractured. The Persians, meanwhile, learned from their masters, their armor, their roads, their politics. But within their hearts burned something else, a quiet ambition, patient as the desert wind. The desert teaches only one lesson, an old proverb would say. To endure is to conquer. From the city of Anshan, a young prince was born who would turn that endurance into destiny. His name was Cyrus. He would inherit not just the throne of a small tribe, but the dream of an entire land, to unite the world beyond the mountains. In his youth, Cyrus saw the flaws of his age. Kings ruled by cruelty. Subjects obeyed from fear. Empires rose, burned bright, and died in blood. He envisioned something different, a realm where justice flowed like water through the desert, where many peoples could live under one crown without losing their soul. This was no common ambition. It was the seed of a revolution, not of swords, but of ideas. And in the rugged valleys of Iran, that seed began to grow. Around 550 BC, the Medes still held dominance. Their king, Astyages, grew paranoid, haunted by dreams of a child who would overthrow him. That child was Cyrus. When the prophecy came true, Persia, once a vassal, became the master. Without cruelty, without slaughter, Cyrus took the Median throne, uniting both peoples under one banner. And with that, the foundation of the Achaemenid Empire was laid. From the silence of mountains came an empire of vision. No longer was Persia the forgotten plateau between worlds. It was becoming the bridge between East and West, between faith and power, between man and his ideals. Every empire begins with a dream. For the Persians, that dream was simple: to bring order to the world, to turn chaos into harmony, to prove that even from the most desolate lands, greatness could bloom. Thus began the rise of Persia, a land of mountains and dreams. Empires are not born in comfort. They are born in silence, in exile, in prophecy, in the heart of those who dream beyond their station. Cyrus was one such dreamer. The son of a minor Persian ruler, he was born into a world that told him to kneel. The Medes ruled over his people with pride and suspicion. To them, Persians were shepherds, not sovereigns, tools, not equals. But destiny, as it often does, ignored the chains of birth. Legend says that Astyages, king of the Medes, dreamed of his daughter giving birth to a child who would one day overthrow him. Terrified, he ordered the newborn killed. Yet fate, or perhaps the will of the divine, spared the infant. A herdsman took the boy and raised him among the mountains, where he learned endurance, humility, and the value of freedom. Those who have nothing to lose, the chronicles say, become the ones who take everything. Years later, when Astyages discovered the boy had lived, it was too late. The prophecy had already begun. Cyrus rose from obscurity, uniting the Persian tribes under his banner. Not by fear, but by vision. He promised them a new dawn, not merely to survive, but to build a kingdom worthy of their endurance. He began his revolt around 550 BCE, when the world seemed unshakable. Assyria was gone, Babylon shone in gold, Lydia commanded the western riches, and the Medes still held the Iranian plateau. Who would fear a nomad prince from Anshan? Yet within a few short years, that nomad would redraw the map of the ancient world. The war with the Medes was swift but decisive. Cyrus moved not as a conqueror, but as a reformer. He offered mercy to those who surrendered and honor to those who fought. Many Median generals defected, disgusted by Astyages' tyranny. When the capital of Ecbatana fell, Cyrus did not burn it. He entered peacefully, declaring the Medes and Persians as one people under one rule. In that moment, the Achaemenid Empire was born, but Cyrus was not content with unity. He sought to bring order to the four corners of the world, a vision no king had yet achieved. His campaigns were lightning, a blend of diplomacy, intelligence, and speed that left his enemies stunned. First came Lydia, a land of gold and arrogance. Its king, Croesus, was said to be the richest man on earth. He laughed at the idea of Persia's rise. When the Oracle of Delphi told him, "If you attack Persia, you will destroy a great empire," Croesus took it as a blessing. He was right, but the empire destroyed was his own. Cyrus moved like a storm, crossing mountains in winter, catching the Lydians unprepared. At Sardis, he broke their chariots, captured Croesus, and ended the kingdom in mere weeks. But again, he spared his enemy. He treated Croesus as a guest, not a prisoner, a gesture unheard of in ancient warfare. Even his foes began to whisper that Cyrus was touched by divine justice. Then came Babylon, the city of kings, the heart of Mesopotamia, thought impregnable. Its walls were colossal, its gates iron, its rivers divine. Yet in 539 BCE, Cyrus took it without destroying a single temple. He diverted the Euphrates, entered the city by night, and captured it almost bloodlessly. The people of Babylon hailed him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. In the ruins of history, one artifact tells their story: the Cyrus cylinder. Carved in cuneiform, it declared freedom of worship, the return of exiles, the rebuilding of shrines. It is often called the world's first declaration of human rights. Cyrus had achieved what no one before him dared to imagine: a universal empire built on tolerance, not terror. In a world of despots, he ruled as a shepherd king. He respected every god, every language, every law, and in return his subjects called him father. But beneath the reverence lay a philosophy, one that would shape Persian identity for centuries. The struggle between Asha, truth order, and Druj, lie, chaos. Zoroastrianism, the ancient faith of Persia, taught that man's duty was to preserve harmony, to bring light wherever darkness ruled. Cyrus embodied that cosmic mission. His conquests were not mere expansion, they were the restoration of balance. In the eyes of his people, he was not just a king. He was a chosen instrument of the divine order, the Shahanshah, King of Kings. By the end of his reign, Cyrus ruled over 25 nations, from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Central Asia. He commanded the largest empire the world had ever known. Yet it was his governance, not his armies, that held it together. He built the Royal Road, connecting distant lands with stations, couriers, and safe passage for merchants. He established local governors, satraps, who oversaw regions while preserving native customs. It was an empire that breathed unity through diversity, the first true global order. Even the Greeks, his future rivals, would admire him. Herodotus wrote of his wisdom, Xenophon praised his virtue. They saw in him the paradox of power, strength without cruelty, majesty without vanity. But like all mortals, Cyrus's story would end not in triumph, but in the quiet hands of fate. In 530 BCE, leading an expedition against the Massagetae in the east, he fell in battle, struck down by those who refused even his mercy. When his body was returned to Persia, his people mourned not only a king, but an ideal. His tomb still stands today at Pasargadae, simple, austere, eternal. No gold, no grandeur, only stone and silence. Upon it are said to be words that echo through millennia. O man, whosoever you are, and whencesoever you come, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians. Grudge me not this little earth that covers my body. In a world of conquerors, Cyrus was something rarer, a builder. He taught that power without justice is fleeting, and that mercy is the truest sign of strength. His successors would inherit a vast and ordered realm, and with it, the impossible task of preserving his vision. For empires, like men, are easiest to build when guided by purpose, and easiest to lose when that purpose fades. Thus ended the age of Cyrus, and began the golden century of Persia. When Cyrus fell, the world held its breath. The empire he forged through mercy and vision stretched from the Aegean to the Hindu Kush, a realm of 25 nations bound by one crown. But empires, like stars, require new fuel to burn. And in the quiet that followed his death, Persia trembled. A dozen claimants rose. Satraps betrayed one another. For 7 long months, the throne stood empty while whispers filled the halls of Ecbatana and Babylon. Until a soldier, calm and calculating, stepped out of the storm. His name was Darius, son of Hystaspes, of noble blood, but not royal. He was not the founder of the empire. He was the one who would teach it how to endure. Darius seized power in 522 BCE, ending the chaos with speed that bordered on divine will. Rebellion burned across the provinces, Elam, Media, Egypt, Babylon, each declaring itself free. Where Cyrus had conquered hearts, Darius would conquer disorder. In a single year, he crushed 9 revolts and carved his victories into stone at Behistun. There he wrote in 3 tongues, "By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I am king. I fought for the truth. The lie made men rebel. I defeated them. I restored order. Where Cyrus dreamed, Darius built. He transformed conquest into administration, chaos into code. From his mind emerged the first true bureaucracy, a machine of empire that could move faster than any army. He divided the realm into satrapies, provinces each governed by a satrap, or protector of the kingdom. Every satrap commanded soldiers and collected tribute, yet each was watched by royal inspectors known as the eyes and ears of the king. It was genius, trust, balanced by vigilance, autonomy, chained to accountability. Across thousands of miles, Darius spun a web of stone and law. He built the royal road stretching from Sardis to Susa. Relay riders carried messages across continents in less than 10 days, a marvel unmatched until modern times. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor night, the Greeks wrote, stops these couriers from their appointed course. Merchants thrived. Markets pulsed from Egypt to Bactria. A standard gold coin, the Daric, flowed through every port, stamped with the king's archer figure, unity forged in metal. Weights, measures, taxation, even the language of government became uniform. For the first time, empire had an operating system, but Darius was not merely a manager of numbers, he was a builder of worlds. At the heart of his reign rose Persepolis, the city of the Persians. Its terraces climbed the mountain like a stairway to heaven. Its columns blossomed into stone lotus. Its walls carried the tribute of nations, Egyptians with gold, Lydians with silver, Indians with ivory, Greeks with wine. Every carving whispered the same truth: many peoples, one order. In Persepolis, ceremony replaced conquest. Each spring, during Novruz, envoys from every province ascended the great stairway to present gifts before the throne. It was not submission, it was synchronization, a ritual of harmony in motion. To the Persians, Darius had realized Asha, divine truth and order made manifest upon earth. His genius reached into law itself. He codified judgments, respected local customs, and allowed each nation its faith. Egypt kept its temples. Babylon kept its gods. The Jews, still exiled from Jerusalem, received permission to rebuild their temple. The empire was vast, yet its pulse steady, a paradox of discipline and tolerance. Still, order demands vigilance, and vigilance feeds suspicion. Toward the end of his reign, Darius looked west, to a small cluster of restless cities on the edge of the Aegean, the Greek Ionian colonies. There, merchants and philosophers murmured of liberty, a word foreign to empire. When rebellion flared, Darius crushed it swiftly and decisively. But in the ashes, a seed was planted: revenge. Greece would not forget the fire of Sardis. Thus began a shadow that would one day consume the empire. Yet for now, Darius stood invincible. He extended Persian borders into the Indus valleys, into Thrace, to the very edge of the known world. He created canals linking the Nile to the Red Sea, the ancestor of Suez itself. He left behind not chaos, but a pattern, governance, roads, and justice. Under Darius, the empire was not just ruled, it was managed. Every resource recorded, every rebellion anticipated, every decision copied onto clay tablets stored in archives. The Achaemenid state became a living organism, arteries of road and courier, lungs of trade, a brain of scribes. It was efficient, rational, and perhaps, for that reason, brittle. For when a system depends on one will, one guiding mind, what happens when that mind is gone? In his old age, Darius sought to secure his legacy through the same order he cherished. He appointed his son Xerxes as heir and trained him in the balance between fear and faith. But the world Darius built was too perfect, too vast. Perfection demands maintenance, and empires like machines rust in human hands. He died in 486 BCE, entombed in the cliffs of Nakshi Rustam, his likeness carved gigantic upon the rock, a king standing on a platform held by the nations of his realm, one hand raised to heaven before the winged symbol of Ahura Mazda. Even in death, Darius watched over order. Darius was not loved as Cyrus was loved. He was respected, feared, obeyed, the engineer of empire. If Cyrus was the soul of Persia, Darius was its spine. He gave shape to ideals, laws to dreams, discipline to mercy. And yet, in that discipline lay the seed of stagnation. When the machine of empire became too perfect, it left no room for wonder, only obedience. The Persians, once inspired by vision, now marched to protocol. The empire that began with freedom now moved beneath bureaucracy. Across the sea, Greek philosophers began to speak of another way, a world where men were citizens, not subjects, where debate replaced decree. The stage was set for collision. Xerxes would inherit the greatest empire the world had ever seen, and the impossible burden of living up to both Cyrus and Darius. The world had been built in order, and order demands its test. Thus ended the reign of Darius, the architect of empire. He gave Persia the strength of structure, and in doing so, bound it to destiny. The roads he built would carry armies and ideas alike. The coins he minted would buy loyalty and rebellion. And the discipline he forged would meet its reckoning on the plains of Marathon, under the banners of his son, the proud, the relentless Xerxes. Xerxes inherited an empire of impossible perfection. From the Nile to the Indus, from the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf, all bowed to the throne of Darius. Roads stretched like veins through the body of the empire, carrying tribute, soldiers, and news. Temples stood intact, markets glimmered with gold, and in Persepolis, the fire of Ahura Mazda burned eternal. But perfection is a fragile thing. Where his father had ruled through reason, Xerxes ruled through pride. He was born to command, not to build. To him, the empire was not a balance to maintain. It was a destiny to complete. He had grown up in the shadow of greatness. Cyrus the Merciful, Darius the Wise, two titans whose names were carved into mountains. And when his crown gleamed upon his brow, he swore he would not just preserve their world, he would expand it. He would finish what his father began, the conquest of Greece. Greece, a cluster of city-states, quarrelsome and proud. To the Persians, they were a splinter, a small nuisance on the edge of empire. Yet these tiny cities had defied Darius. They had burned Sardis, challenged Persia's authority, and dared to speak of freedom. For Xerxes, this was more than rebellion. It was an insult to divine order. He gathered the might of the known world. From the steppes of Central Asia came horsemen in fur and bronze. From Egypt came ships and archers. From Babylon, chariots and engineers. From India, ivory and war elephants. It was said that when his army crossed the Hellespont, the sea itself trembled. Over 1 million men, 20 nations, and thousands of ships. A moving continent of war. The bridges of boats spanned the narrow waters between Asia and Europe. When a storm destroyed them, Xerxes ordered the sea itself to be whipped and the engineers executed. The King of Kings would not be defied by nature. He crossed into Greece in 480 BCE, carrying not just armies, but the weight of divine mission. In his eyes, this was no conquest. It was purification, a world of order extinguishing the chaos of disobedience. And then came the pass of Thermopylae, a narrow gate of mountains where a few thousand Greeks stood against his endless host. At their head was Leonidas, king of Sparta. The Persians advanced in waves. Arrows darkened the sky. The ground became mud with a blood. For 3 days they stood unbroken until treachery opened the back path. Leonidas fell, but his defiance became legend. Xerxes pressed onward. Athens burned. The temples of the Acropolis turned to smoke. To the king, this was victory. Divine justice fulfilled. But the Greeks were not finished. They retreated to the sea, drawing Persia into narrow straits where numbers meant nothing. At Salamis, the Persian fleet met its doom. Greek triremes, smaller and swifter, rammed the Grand Armada until the waters ran black with tar and fire. From the shore, Xerxes watched his navy die. The empire that had stretched across continents had found its limit in a handful of wooden ships. He retreated to Asia, leaving his generals to fight on. At Plataea, at Mycale, the Persians fell. The dream of conquering Greece was over. The shadow of Persia, once unstoppable, had been pierced. Yet Xerxes did not return defeated. In Persia, he remained the king of kings. He built more palaces, expanded Persepolis, filled it with gold and marble. But the fire of conquest was gone. The court grew decadent, the nobles proud, the bureaucracy swollen. The machine his father built no longer moved with purpose. It consumed itself in luxury. In his later years, Xerxes withdrew from war and turned to the pleasures of the palace. He surrounded himself with eunuchs, courtiers, and flatterers. Intrigue replaced ambition. His reign, once filled with thunder, faded into whispers, and in one of those whispers lay his death, assassinated by his own guards in 465 BCE. The man who had commanded the greatest army in history died in silence, betrayed within his own walls. Yet history remembers him not as a failure, but as a symbol, the high tide of Persian power. For after Xerxes, the empire would endure for another century, but never again would it inspire awe or fear as it once had. The wars with Greece had broken the illusion of invincibility. The edges of the empire began to fray. Satraps grew bold. New kings rose weaker than the last. And somewhere beyond the horizon, a new conqueror waited to rise. A young Macedonian who would one day claim to be heir of Cyrus himself. But for now, the empire of Persia still stood, vast and glittering, bathed in the fading light of its golden age. Its kings still called themselves rulers of the four corners of the world. Its cities still glowed beneath the eternal flame. And its people still believed that the order of Ahura Mazda would never fall. They could not yet hear the footsteps coming, the echo of a storm from the west. A storm named Alexander. The empire that Cyrus had built and Darius perfected now stood like a mountain on the horizon of history, vast, unmoving, eternal. But even mountains crumble, not from storms, but from time. A century had passed since the days of Xerxes. Persia still called itself the ruler of the four corners of the world, yet its glory had turned inward. The great satraps lived as kings in their own provinces. Gold flowed like rivers through their courts, while the heart of the empire grew weak. The fire still burned in the temples of Ahura Mazda, but in the hearts of men, the flame flickered. In 336 BCE, the last of the Achaemenid kings took the throne, Darius III. He was born of royal blood, but not of royal strength. The empire he inherited was fractured, burdened by decadence and distrust. And far to the west, across the sea once thought too small to threaten Persia, a new force began to rise, young, brilliant, and merciless. His name was Alexander of Macedon. To the Persians, he was little more than a barbarian prince. To the Greeks, he was the heir of Achilles, the chosen of Zeus. And to history, he would become the storm that ended an age. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with an army of 30,000 men. Not a nation, not an empire, just ambition and faith. He carried with him the dream of revenge for the wars of Xerxes and Darius the Great. But deeper still, he carried a vision of his own, to unite East and West under one rule. Two worlds that had fought for centuries would meet again, one last time, upon the plains of Asia. At Granicus, Alexander struck first. The Persians expected arrogance, and he gave them audacity. He charged across the river into their ranks, cutting down the satraps who guarded the frontier. At Issus, he met Darius himself, the old world against the new. The Persian army stretched across the horizon, its banners gleaming like waves of gold. Alexander's forces were outnumbered, yet they moved with purpose. His cavalry cut through the flanks, the phalanx pressed the center. And then, in the chaos, Darius fled. The King of Kings turned his chariot and vanished into the dust. That moment broke the illusion of divine power. The God King had run from a mortal. And once a god is seen to bleed, his empire begins to die. Alexander marched through Syria, Phoenicia, and Egypt. Cities that had once worshipped the Persian king now opened their gates to the new conqueror. He was young, unstoppable, and strangely merciful, much like Cyrus in the dawn of empire. When he reached Babylon, the gates opened without resistance. The city that Cyrus had taken 2 centuries earlier surrendered again, this time to another vision of greatness. By 331 BCE, the two Dariuses, one living, one dead in legacy, were destined to meet their fate. At Gaugamela, the final battle began. It was the largest army the East had ever assembled. 1 million men, war elephants, chariots with blades on their wheels. Against them stood 35,000 Macedonians and Greeks, tired but unbroken. Under a pale moon, the dust of their march rose like mist. When dawn came, the sun shone on the last breath of the Persian Empire. Alexander moved like lightning. His left wing held the Persian advance, his right curved inward like a blade. He saw Darius's chariot in the distance and charged straight for it. The Persian lines wavered, then cracked. Once again, Darius fled, and once again the world watched a god king fall to dust. The empire was finished. Darius would be betrayed and murdered by his own men, not slain in battle, but abandoned by loyalty. When Alexander found his body, he covered it with his cloak and ordered royal burial. He had conquered his enemy, but he honored the legacy of Cyrus. For in that moment, he believed he had become its heir. Then came Persepolis, the heart of Persia, the city of kings, the dream of Darius the Great. Alexander entered it not as a destroyer, but as a pilgrim. He walked through the grand halls, saw the carvings of nations offering tribute, the pillars that reached for heaven. He understood, perhaps better than any Greek before him, what Persia had been, a civilization of order, law, and light. For months he stayed in Persepolis, but as wine replaced reflection, reverence turned to ruin. At a feast, surrounded by laughter, dancers, and fire, a spark caught the curtains of the palace. Some say it was an accident, others say it was vengeance. That a Greek courtesan named Thais urged Alexander to burn the symbol of Persian arrogance. Whatever the cause, the fire spread. The cedar beams caught, the gold melted, and the night sky turned crimson. Persepolis burned. The city that once embodied the unity of nations became an inferno. Flames devoured the palaces of Darius, the reliefs of tribute, the carved faces of stone kings. And as the smoke rose into the heavens, Alexander watched in silence. Some say he wept. Others say he laughed. Perhaps he did both, for in that fire, he destroyed what he could never surpass. When dawn came, nothing remained but ash and memory. The empire of Persia, once the greatest in the world, was gone. Yet even in its fall, its influence endured. Alexander adopted Persian customs, married a Persian princess, and dressed in the robes of the East. His empire, though short-lived, became a mirror of the one he destroyed, a union of East and West, born from the ruins of fire. And so, in dying, Persia conquered its conqueror. Its spirit lived on in every empire that followed. In Rome's bureaucracy, in Byzantium's ceremony, in Islam's vision of unity. The world would never again see a realm so vast, so orderly, so human in its rule. Empires rise by the sword, but they endure through the idea that power must serve justice. That was the dream of Cyrus, that was the law of Darius, and even Alexander, who burned their city, carried their flame forward into history. The fire that consumed Persepolis did not end Persia. It transformed it. For though the palaces turned to ash, the idea of Persia, the belief in order, mercy, and civilization burned brighter than ever. Empires fall, but fire endures. The fire of Persepolis faded, but the story of Persia was not over. Empires may fall, yet the land beneath them remembers. The mountains of Iran had seen too many suns to forget the dream of Cyrus. From the ashes of the Achaemenids, the spirit of Persia waited, silent, patient, unbroken. For a time, foreign kings ruled the land. Alexander's generals divided his conquests, and the East became a patchwork of Greek dominions. Cities rose with marble columns and Hellenic theaters. Greek became the language of the elite. But beneath the surface, in villages and temples, in songs and prayers, the old faith of Ahura Mazda endured. The people still whispered the ancient names: Asha, Mithra, Anahita. They still believed that light would rise again from darkness. 2 centuries passed. Then, out of the northern plains, a new power emerged. The Parthians, horsemen of iron and dust. They were not kings by birth, but warriors by will. They fought the remnants of Alexander's empire and drove them west. From their arrows and their silence came a new dynasty. Fierce, pragmatic, and free. The Parthians rebuilt what was lost, not in marble, but in endurance. They ruled from the city of Ctesiphon, where caravans from China and Rome met under Persian skies. Their empire stretched from the Euphrates to the borders of India, binding east and west once more. But unlike the Achaemenids, they were less architects and more survivors. They ruled through balance, alliances, marriages, and calculated peace. Their greatest skill was patience. When Rome expanded eastward, hungry for glory, the Parthians met them not with numbers, but with tactics. At Carrhae, Roman legions marched proudly into the desert and never returned. Parthian horse archers circled them, vanishing like ghosts, leaving only silence and death. Rome, the new empire of the West, had met its mirror, an empire of endurance. The struggle between Rome and Parthia would last for centuries, neither side truly victorious. The world had entered a new balance, 2 great powers watching each other across the rivers of Mesopotamia. Yet history moves in cycles. The Parthians, strong in battle but weak in unity, began to fade. From within their own borders rose a new family, one that claimed descent from the ancient kings of Achaemenid glory. They called themselves the Sassanids. Under Ardashir-Ur, the Sassanid banner rose over Persia once more. They cast down the Parthian nobles, reclaimed Ctesiphon, and declared the rebirth of Iran. The true Persia restored. The year was 224 CE, and the world once again felt the pulse of an ancient heart. Where the Achaemenids had ruled through tolerance, the Sassanids ruled through conviction. Zoroastrianism became the faith of the state. Fire temples blazed upon the hills, their eternal flames symbols of truth against the darkness. Priests codified scripture, kings decreed law, and the empire's order reflected the cosmos itself. Light and shadow, good and evil, locked in endless struggle. The Sassanids built cities of learning and beauty. They revived Persian art, silver plates engraved with royal hunts, silk dyed with sacred colors, palaces adorned with winged lions and suns. Their engineers rebuilt canals, their physicians studied Greek and Indian medicine, their scholars preserved the wisdom of the ancients. When Europe fell into its long night after Rome's collapse, Persia still burned with knowledge. But as the Sassanids rose in power, so too did their enemies. To the west stood the Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's ambition. For 400 years, Persia and Byzantium waged an endless duel, neither able to destroy the other, both too proud to yield. War after war scarred the land, draining gold, blood, and faith. The struggle reached its height under King Khosrow II, the greatest of the Sassanid rulers. Under his command, Persian armies conquered Syria, Egypt, even Jerusalem. For a brief moment, the dream of universal empire returned. It seemed that Cyrus's vision might live again, but the gods of history are cruel. Khosrow's victories stretched his realm too far. His subjects grew weary, his generals turned on him, and rebellion shattered the empire. As Persia bled, a new faith was rising from the deserts of Arabia, one that carried the power of unity, devotion, and fire. It came not with the banners of kings, but with the words of a prophet. Within a single generation, that faith, Islam, would sweep across the world. In 651 CE, the Sassanid Empire fell. The armies of the Caliphate entered Ctesiphon, and the last Persian king, Yazdgerd III, fled into the mountains. The ancient fire temples were extinguished. The old gods fell silent. The empire of Persia, after 1,000 years of rise and rebirth, was gone. And yet, not gone. Because Persia, unlike its conquerors, did not vanish. It transformed. The Persians embraced the new faith, but gave it beauty, philosophy, and depth. They became poets, scholars, scientists, and mystics. They translated Greek knowledge into Arabic, preserved it through centuries, and returned it to the West. Their language survived, reshaped by time, but never erased. Their art blossomed again in domes, gardens, and verses that spoke to eternity. From the ruins of empires, Persia became a civilization of the mind. Its poets, Ferdowsi, Hafez, Rumi, spoke of love, justice, and divine light in words that echoed the faith of old. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, retold the entire history of Iran, from myth to empire to loss, preserving a nation's soul when its body was gone. Persia became a bridge, once more, between East and West, between the world of faith and the world of reason, between memory and rebirth. Its ideas shaped Islam's golden age, inspired philosophy in India, and later poetry in Europe. Even when its borders vanished, its culture became eternal. Empires die, but identity endures. The Persians taught the world that civilization is not the walls it builds, but the light it carries forward. Cyrus built justice. Darius built order. The Sassanids built faith. And their descendants built meaning, the unseen empire of the human spirit. Today, the ruins of Persepolis still stand beneath the Iranian sun. The pillars rise like the ribs of a sleeping giant. The carvings are worn, the inscriptions faded. But when the wind passes through those stones, it whispers a name, not of conquest, but of endurance: Persia. The empire that fell 1,000 times and rose 1,000 more. Long before the rise of Rome, before Greece sang of gods upon Olympus, the people of ancient Iran looked into the sky and saw not chaos, but order, a universe divided between light and shadow. This vision would shape their civilization, and through it, the spiritual DNA of the world. They called their faith Zoroastrianism, after the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, as the Greeks would say. He was not a conqueror or a priest of wealth, he was a seeker. He looked at the bloodshed of his age and asked a question that has echoed through centuries. If the world is created by a good God, why do evil and suffering exist? His answer was simple and yet profound, because existence itself is a battleground. Not of men, but of principles. Truth and falsehood, light and darkness, creation and decay. Zarathustra taught that the supreme God, Ahura Mazda, was not merely powerful, he was good. Opposing him was Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction, the eternal lie. Every soul, human or divine, was caught in their struggle. Every choice tilted the balance of the universe. Unlike the fatalistic religions of its time, Zoroastrianism preached free will. Man was not a pawn of fate, but a warrior of conscience. To think rightly, to speak truth, to act with integrity, this was the sacred triad of life. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. It was a theology of morality, not sacrifice. No blood was demanded, no cruelty sanctified. Fire, pure, uncorrupted, eternal, became its symbol. In every temple, a sacred flame burned without end, reminding believers that within them also burned the spark of divine light. From these teachings came the foundation of Persian civilization. Cyrus's mercy, Darius's order, the Sassanid sense of cosmic duty, all were reflections of Zarathustra's faith. Their empires were more than realms of men. They were meant to mirror the order of the heavens. But Zoroastrianism's influence reached far beyond Persia's borders. When Babylon fell to Cyrus, the Jews exiled there encountered this strange, radiant faith and absorbed its ideas. The concepts of heaven and hell, of angels and demons, of a coming savior and a final judgment, all trace their roots to Zarathustra's vision. Through Judaism, they flowed into Christianity, and through it, into the moral framework of the modern world. The fire of Persia illuminated even its enemies. Greek philosophers like Heraclitus spoke of the universe as a conflict of opposites: light and dark, war and peace, creation and destruction, echoing the cosmic dualism of the Persians. Later, Roman Stoics would teach that virtue is living in harmony with divine order, another echo of Asha, the Persian truth. Even Islam, which conquered the Sassanids, carried traces of Zoroastrian light. Its reverence for cleanliness, its moral accountability, its unseen hierarchy of angels, all whispered the memory of an older faith. Though the temples fell and the priests fled, the ideas endured, woven into the tapestry of new belief. In time, Zoroastrianism became a shadow, small in number but vast in legacy. Its followers fled east to India, where they became known as the Parsis. There they kept the flame alive, building fire temples that still burn after 2,000 years. They carried with them the oldest moral code in history, that every man and woman has a duty to make the world better through the goodness of their thoughts, their words, and their deeds. Today, though few, they remain the keepers of a light that has never gone out. They remind us that faith is not blind obedience, but moral courage, the choice to serve the light even when the world is dark. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of Persia. Not its armies or palaces, but its conviction that good and evil are real, that truth matters, that each person bears the burden and honor of free will. It is a vision that transcended religion, politics, and empire. It turned power into principle, kingship into stewardship, and faith into fire. From Zoroaster's mountains to the ruins of Persepolis, from the prayers of exiled Parsis to the words of modern philosophers, the same question burns on: will we choose the light? Because the universe, as Zarathustra taught, is not waiting for gods to act. It is waiting for us. And as long as one person chooses truth over falsehood, kindness over cruelty, courage over fear, the sacred flame endures. It is said that the last words of the prophet were these: "May the fire of wisdom guide your heart, and may your deeds be the bridge between the earth and the stars. That is the faith of Persia, not of conquest, but of conscience, not of ritual, but of responsibility, not of gods on distant thrones, but of light within the soul of man. Faith, fire, and memory, the eternal trinity of a people who taught the world that even when empires fall, the light must never fade. And it never has. The empire of Persia may have fallen, but its soul never left the stage of history. Across deserts and centuries, the echo of its greatness still whispers. In the rhythm of poetry, in the arches of mosques, in the quiet pride of a nation that calls itself Iran, the land of Aryans, the heirs of light. Persia did not survive as an empire of swords. It survived as an empire of words. When the armies were gone and the palaces turned to dust, a new kind of empire emerged, built not of stone, but of language and art. From the 10th century onward, Persian poets became the chroniclers of existence itself. Their verses did not speak of conquest, but of the soul's journey, from ignorance to illumination, from love to divinity. The greatest of them all was Ferdowsi, who lived when the old fire was nearly extinguished. For 30 years, he wrote the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, 60,000 couplets of history, myth, and memory. It told of heroes and demons, of wisdom and pride, of kings who built and kings who fell. But beneath the legends lay a deeper truth, the moral heartbeat of a civilization. Through Ferdowsi, Persia remembered itself. He restored a language that foreign rule had tried to erase. He gave his people a mirror in which to see their ancient dignity. In every line of his poem burned the soul of Cyrus, Darius, and Zarathustra, the belief that justice and virtue outlast power. Then came Omar Khayyam, the philosopher-poet of the stars. He looked up at the night sky and saw the futility of kings. His Rubaiyat spoke not of empire, but of time and mortality. He wrote, "The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line." In those words, the grandeur of Persia turned inward, from dominion over men to dominion over meaning. After him came Sadi, Hafez, Rumi, poets whose names the world still speaks with reverence. Their verses were not bound to a single faith. They spoke of love as the language of the divine. Rumi's words would one day travel westward, translated into dozens of tongues, making him one of the best-selling poets in modern America. But centuries before that, he was simply a son of Persia, teaching that the wound is where the light enters you. In these poets, the empire found immortality, for no conqueror could burn a verse, no tyranny could silence a metaphor. Persia had discovered the most enduring empire of all, the empire of the mind. But the echo of Persia is not heard only in words. It lives in architecture, in the curve of domes, in the play of light and shadow that defines Islamic art. When the Arab caliphs came, they brought faith. When the Persians rebuilt, they gave that faith form. The great mosques of Isfahan, Shiraz, and Samarkand rose like poems in stone, their blue tiles reflecting the sky, their calligraphy tracing verses of light. No two patterns were the same, yet all spoke the same language. Unity through complexity, order through beauty. The Persian garden became another expression of the old belief, paradise as balance, nature shaped by reason. Water channels divided the space into perfect quarters, symbolizing the four elements of creation. From these gardens came a word that the world still uses, paradisa, paradise. Even the palaces of Mughal India, the mosques of Turkey, and the courts of Andalusia owe their grace to Persian hands and minds. The Taj Mahal, that marble dream of eternal love, was built by architects trained in the Persian tradition. Its symmetry, its gardens, its inscriptions, all descend from the vision first born in the palaces of Persepolis. Persian influence did not spread by conquest, but by inspiration. Its culture became the bridge between civilizations, carrying Greek thought eastward and Indian philosophy westward. Its scholars preserved the works of Aristotle and Plato, translating them into Arabic, saving them from oblivion. When the European Renaissance dawned, it awoke to ideas that had once passed through Persian minds. But Persia's greatest gift was not art or poetry or science. It was continuity, the quiet refusal to disappear. Empires came and went, Arab, Mongol, Turkic. Each tried to shape Persia in its image, yet each in time became Persian. The Mongols, who had burned cities to the ground, rebuilt them with Persian architects. Their courts adopted Persian etiquette, Persian administrators, Persian poets. Under the Ilkhans and later the Timurids, Iran became a beacon of learning once again. Out of conquest came creation. Out of ruin, refinement. In the 16th century, a new dynasty rose, the Safavids. They unified the land once more, declared Shia Islam as the state faith, and gave birth to the modern nation of Iran. Under them, Isfahan became half the world, a city of minarets and markets, of bridges like music over water. The Safavid kings saw themselves as heirs not only to Islam, but to Persia's eternal lineage, a chain of light stretching back to Cyrus the Great, and that chain still endures. Today's Iran, with all its struggles, its contradictions, and its beauty, carries the same dual spirit that has defined Persia for 3,000 years. Pride and poetry, tragedy and endurance. Its people still recite Hafez at the dinner table, still visit Rumi's tomb, still see in every ruin a reminder that nothing truly ends. They live amid the tension that has always been Persian, between power and wisdom, between faith and freedom, between the fire that destroys and the fire that enlightens. Persian thought has shaped how the modern world sees identity itself. It reminds us that civilization is not the dominance of one people over another, but the weaving of many threads into a single pattern. That beauty is not the opposite of strength, but its truest expression, and that to remember is to resist, to defy the erosion of time by the persistence of meaning. When a poet in Tehran writes of injustice, when an architect restores a mosque, when a scholar translates ancient texts, they are all part of the same echo. It is the sound of a civilization that refuses to be silenced. The Persians have a saying, "The reed that bends in the wind does not break." Through conquest, exile, and revolution, they have bent 1,000 times, but never broken. Persia endures in every word that seeks truth, every gesture of kindness, every act of creation that defies destruction. For the true measure of a civilization is not how long it ruled, but how deeply it taught humanity to see. From the mountain fire altars to the blue domes of Isfahan, from the verses of Rumi to the voices of modern Iran, the same melody continues, soft, defiant, eternal. It is the sound of memory made immortal, the echo through time. Empires rise on the edge of swords, but they endure in the hearts of men. And long after the banners fall, when the palaces crumble and the maps are redrawn, what remains is not land, but memory. Persia was never just a place. It was an idea, a belief that power should serve justice, that beauty is the language of truth, that the order of the universe begins within the soul of man. That idea has survived every conquest, every empire, every exile. It is not written on paper or carved in stone. It is written in the human spirit. When we speak of Persia today, we are not speaking of borders or kings or battles. We are speaking of a mirror held up to civilization itself, a reflection of what humanity can be when it believes in something greater than domination, when it seeks harmony instead of victory. Cyrus taught that mercy was stronger than fear. Darius proved that order could outlive conquest. Zarathustra whispered that truth itself was sacred. and from their voices grew a civilization that stretched beyond geography, beyond time. A moral empire. The ruins of Persepolis still stand under the Iranian sun. Their pillars rise like ribs of an ancient heart open to the sky. No roof, no throne, no king remains. But if you listen to the wind between the stones, you can still hear a heartbeat, steady, patient, eternal. It is the sound of a people who learned that greatness is not the act of ruling others, but of mastering oneself. For the true empire, the one that never falls, is the empire within. Every civilization that came after Persia borrowed from it, knowingly or not. Rome learned administration. Byzantium learned ceremony. Islam learned unity and law. Europe inherited ethics of light and darkness, justice and truth. The world learned that civilization is not chaos tamed by force, but harmony maintained by wisdom. But Persia's legacy goes beyond systems or symbols. It lies in the human search for meaning, in our refusal to accept that cruelty and ignorance are inevitable. Every time we choose compassion over conquest, knowledge over pride, art over destruction, we echo the wisdom of the ancient fire. The Persians saw the world not as an accident of power, but as a moral order. Every action mattered. Every lie weakened the universe. Every truth restored it. And in this vision, every man and woman became a guardian of creation. The empire was not confined to walls or armies. It was alive in thought, in word, in deed. That is why Persia never truly died. Its cities were conquered, its kings slain, its temples turned to dust, and yet its spirit found new vessels. It lived in poetry when it could no longer live in politics. It lived in gardens when it could no longer live in temples. It lived in conscience when it could no longer live in crown. That is the secret of endurance. To transform, not resist. To bend like the reed and never break. And perhaps that is the lesson of all empires. That dominion is temporary, but influence is eternal. That it is not what you build, but what you awaken, that survives you. Cyrus built walls and laws, but what he truly built was trust. Darius built roads and order, but what he truly built was vision. Zarathustra lit a fire, but what he truly lit was the human mind. Even now, thousands of years later, the world still walks the roads Persia laid, not the ones of stone, but the ones of thought. Every constitution that speaks of justice, every religion that honors conscience, every philosophy that believes in balance owes something to that ancient flame. And yet, the greatest danger to any civilization is forgetting why it was born. Persia, too, forgot. In the pursuit of power, it lost sight of principle. The fire that once guided it became the fire that consumed it. That, too, is part of the lesson. Because the fall of Persia is not only history, it is prophecy. Every empire, every nation, every human being faces the same test. Will you rule with justice, or will you let pride blind you? Will your light illuminate or destroy? The answer determines not only how long you stand, but how long you will be remembered. The Persians believed that when a man dies, his soul must cross a bridge, the Chinvat Bridge, narrow as a blade, suspended between heaven and hell. The righteous pass easily, guided by their own good deeds. The wicked fall into darkness. So too, every civilization must cross that bridge. Its art, its science, its justice. These are its steps across the abyss. Its cruelty and greed are the weights that pull it down. Persia crossed that bridge and fell, but its spirit climbed again. It became part of every culture that came after, a hidden current flowing through the story of humanity. And perhaps that is the highest form of victory. Not survival, but transformation. Today, when we speak of Persia, it is no longer a kingdom, but a constellation of poets, philosophers, builders, and dreamers. It is not a place you can conquer, but an idea you can live. The idea that order is sacred, that compassion is wisdom, that light, no matter how faint, must be protected. When the Parsis in India light their temple fires, when a student in Tehran reads Rumi, when an artist in Paris draws a garden inspired by Isfahan, when a philosopher questions the morality of power, the empire still breathes. Invisible, but indestructible. Persia lives wherever humans strive to turn chaos into harmony, ignorance into knowledge, hatred into art. It lives in the quiet courage to choose truth when lies are easier. It lives in every act of creation that says the world can still be beautiful. And so the story of Persia is not the story of rise and fall, but of evolution, from kingdom to idea, from idea to memory, from memory to moral compass. It began with Cyrus freeing the captives of Babylon, and it continues every time someone frees themselves from darkness. 3,000 years later, the words carved in stone still whisper through time. By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I restored order. I fought for the truth. Those words are not the boast of a king. They are the prayer of a civilization. And perhaps they are our prayer too. Because the empire within us, the kingdom of conscience, of light, of reason, is still at war. The same forces that shape Persia shape us. Greed and generosity, pride and humility, cruelty and compassion. The struggle has never ended. It only changes form. To build the empire within is to remember that the greatest victories are not over others, but over ourselves. That the only throne worth keeping is the one we build in our hearts, where justice, mercy, and wisdom rule as one. When we understand that, we become heirs to Persia, not by blood, but by spirit. We carry forward its fire, we continue its story, and we keep alive the oldest truth the world has ever known. Empires fall, but ideas endure. And the light, the eternal light, always finds a way back through the darkness. The sun sets over the ruins of Persepolis. Shadows stretch across the ancient stones, and for a moment, the world is silent, as if time itself holds its breath. There are no kings here now, no armies, no banners, only wind, dust, and memory. But listen closely, and you will hear it. A pulse beneath the silence, faint yet steady. It is the same heartbeat that began 3,000 years ago when a man named Cyrus dreamed of a world ruled not by fear, but by justice. It is the same rhythm that carried through Darius's laws, through Rumi's verses, through the fire temples and the voices of poets, through centuries of struggle and rebirth. Empires fall, their marble cracks, their names fade from maps. But ideas do not die. They smolder, hidden in the ashes, waiting for breath. And when the wind comes again, they rise. That is the true immortality of Persia, not in the crowns it wore, but in the light it carried, the light that passes from age to age, hand to hand, heart to heart. The Persians called it Asha, the truth, the rightness of all things. To live in Asha was to walk in harmony with creation, to see the divine not in heaven, but in the choices of men. Every act of honesty, every gesture of mercy, every spark of wisdom was a victory of light over shadow. That belief crossed oceans and centuries. It became the conscience of empires, the poetry of nations, the moral thread of humanity. Even now, when the world trembles under new storms, the echo of that truth remains. It reminds us that power without justice is hollow, that knowledge without compassion is blindness, that civilization without conscience is only decoration on ruin. The Persians built their empire to mirror the heavens, a realm of order above chaos. And though the heavens themselves shift, the aspiration endures. For every generation must rebuild that empire within itself. Each of us holds a piece of the old fire, a duty to tend it, protect it, and pass it on. The light that burned in Persepolis is the same light that burns in every act of courage today. It shines when a teacher gives truth to a child, when a poet dares to speak against tyranny, when a stranger offers kindness without reward. It is there, quietly, in the small moments that make the world whole. And when you look at the ruins of Persia, you understand something profound. The stones were never meant to last. The fire was. That is why the flame still burns, in Tehran, in Shiraz, in the deserts of Yazd. In the hearts of those who still believe that wisdom and mercy can rule the world better than fear and violence. It burns in the Parsis who keep their sacred fires in India. It burns in the words of poets who write in languages born from Persian lips. It burns even in those who have never heard the name of Cyrus, but live by his dream, that the strong must protect, not oppress. When we remember Persia, we do not mourn a fallen empire. We honor a civilization that refused to surrender its soul. We honor a people who taught that the highest throne is the human conscience and the greatest empire is the one built on truth. History calls them conquerors, kings of kings. But perhaps they were something greater, gardeners of the human spirit. They planted ideas instead of monuments. They cultivated faith instead of fear. And long after their walls fell, the garden still grows. So when you see the sunrise over the ruins of Persepolis, imagine this. The stones are cold, but beneath them, the ancient heartbeat still echoes. It calls to you, softly, insistently, reminding you that the light you carry is older than nations, stronger than empires, and endless as time itself. One day, all that we build will fade, but the light we kindle in others will not. It will travel forward, through voices yet unborn, through hearts yet unbroken, through worlds yet to come. That is the lesson of Persia, the empire that fell 1,000 times and rose 1,000 more. Not in conquest, but in conscience. Not in walls, but in wisdom. Not in kings, but in kindness. The wind still moves through the columns of Persepolis, whispering to the stars. It speaks a truth older than history, older than fire, older than fear. The light never dies. It changes hands, it changes forms, but it never dies. And if you listen, truly listen, you will hear it in your own heartbeat. Because the story of Persia is the story of us all. The eternal struggle between darkness and light, between pride and compassion, between what we destroy and what we preserve. It is the story of humanity. Forever falling, forever rising, forever reaching for the flame. The wind moves through the pillars of Persepolis like breath through an ancient flute. The sky glows red, then gold, then fades to the color of memory. In the stillness, the world feels eternal. And for a fleeting moment, the heartbeat of history and the heartbeat of now become one. Every empire is a story, and every story, in the end, becomes a whisper. But some whispers never fade. They live in the rhythm of language, in the shape of art, in the courage of those who choose light over darkness. Persia's story was never just about kings. It was about humanity. Our endless attempt to bring order to chaos, to make meaning from dust. It was the first empire that believed power could serve peace. That difference could exist within unity. That greatness could come from mercy. That idea has traveled across millennia, from Cyrus to Rumi, from the fire temples to the blue domes of Isfahan, from the words of poets to the dreams of children. It crossed mountains and oceans, changing form, changing names, but never its purpose. To remind us that the light within us is older than any kingdom and stronger than any fall. The ruins you see are not the end of Persia. They are its voice made visible, the echo of something that never truly died. Every carved wing, every broken column, every grain of sand once bore witness to a truth, that no empire built on fear will last, and no idea born from love will ever fade. And so, As the camera drifts over the stones of Persepolis, the light of dawn returns. The first rays touch the carvings of ancient kings, the silent lions, the long lines of tribute bearers who have waited through 25 centuries for the sun to rise again. And it does, because it always does. Persia is gone, yet everywhere. It lives in art that seeks perfection, in faith that seeks peace, in minds that seek truth. It lives in the rhythm of the world itself, a pulse that beats quietly beneath the noise of modern time. One day, our own empires will fall, our cities will fade, our monuments will crumble. But if we have lived with wisdom, if we have built with justice, if we have chosen to leave light behind, then we too will endure. Not as names, but as echoes. That is the legacy of Persia. Not conquest, but continuity. Not dominion, but devotion. Not glory that blinds, but fire that guides. The flames rise, fade, and rise again, carried by those who remember. And so long as even one heart still seeks truth, the empire still stands. The light never dies. It simply changes hands. And now it is in yours.